Welcome to the Inner Athlete Podcast, where we discuss all things youth athlete development and youth mentoring.
Welcome back to the Inner Athlete Podcast. I've got a special guest here. She was a good friend, and now she's finished up her master's. I've got Steph on the other side. Steph, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you going?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Just want to tell them the listeners and the viewers a little bit about yourself, what you've done, and then we'll get deeper into today's topic about nutrition for youth.
Yeah, sure. I guess so. To start with, most recently, I've just completed my dietetics studies. So that was a bit of a journey for me. I started off. I've done my like Cert 3 and 4 in fitness, so I've kind of been in that world a little bit as well. I did a Bachelor of Nutrition Science where I actually did major in exercise physiology too, just to kind of start like incorporating nutrition and exercise. But yeah, most recently I did move to the Gold Coast and I finished a Bachelor of Nutrition and Dietetics. So now I'm a registered dietitian, which was really exciting. And I'm kind of, I guess, doing some extra kind of upskilling in the background. So I've sort of started some eating disorder training as well, which is really cool because it does sort of go hand in hand with the sporting world as well. And I guess sort of my own sporting experience growing up, I did like the whole variety of sports. I've dabbled in like netball, cross country, soccer, hockey, swimming as well. I was a swimmer for a long time, but I guess my main sport that I competed in was surf lifesaving. So that obviously has like a lot of disciplines. So that took up, I guess, most of my sporting career. So I guess that's sort of me in a nutshell.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. But I guess from my perspective as an S&C coach, obviously we can't go too much into the nutrition and I guess the dietetics side, and then working with, Melbourne Swimming Club, and working with a lot of junior swimmers and their pathway development as well. Some of the issues we tend to see is like, I guess, that under-fueling, under-nourishing their bodies, not just for training, but also for just school and growth and development. Just want to kind of briefly touch upon that and then just kind of like some of the pitfalls and then also some of the areas that parents can actually take away from this to actually start to implement moving forward, or what are those red flags that parents need to see first if potentially their kid is struggling and that they may not actually register and then need to actually move on and go see the GP or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so I guess with this age bracket, so with like youth athletes, adolescents, it's a very sort of important age period, and it's because it's a very important growth and development period. So if we take away sort of like the sporting component for a moment and we look at sort of like the requirements of adolescents compared to adults, they have high energy needs, high protein needs, iron, calcium, vitamin D, and they're sort of the nutrients I'm sort of focusing on right now because they are very relevant to sport. And so they're higher than adults just at like a basic sort of for a basic healthy functioning like adolescent. And it's because we see this huge growth, growth spurts, maturation, etc. So I think that's where it's sort of really important to have a bit of context and foundational knowledge. And I think that's where it's important to realize that requirements for this age bracket are very individualized because, like I said, the age bracket is obviously 12 to 18. That's what we're looking at, and so even within the age bracket there's peaks and troughs, etc. So I guess that's a bit of sort of background there. If we then sort of add sport, training, movement, etc. on top of that, then we know with sort of the increased demands of exercise, then all those nutrients that I mentioned, so energy, protein, iron, calcium, vitamin D, etc., they actually increase again as well. So I think that's where it's really important for coaches and parents, trainers, etc., to be really I guess on top of. I guess sort of some pitfalls, particularly in sort of underfueling. I guess it comes from maybe potentially a background of maybe not understanding this and like the importance of this age period. like, I guess, for example, there's a lot of sort of energy and protein going into the development of, new tissues, synthesizing new tissues, and also depositing that into already, growing tissue as well. When we look at calcium, for example, we're looking at, and vitamin D, I should say too, we're looking at like bone health. And during this period, that's where, a lot of our calcium, vitamin D is being deposited into our bones, and they're strengthening that. So I guess that's potentially where, underfueling comes into it. Maybe we just don't actually realize how much sort of like the adolescent, but then also the athlete actually really needs.
Cool. Yeah. So you're giving us quite a lot. So
I know.
This is really good, because I think, and it really does go back to the education side, right? So, with school kids, right, they're given the knowledge in order to eventually find a job, right? But they're not given the knowledge to actually fuel themselves for that potential job itself, whether it is they want to become a professional athlete. So it's not until later on that they have to kind of, figure it out. And then with parents, it's obviously hard enough working full time. You might have to cut kids around on top of that as well. So you mentioned about, I guess, for me, protein's definitely a big one. And that's the thing that I see the most issues with, and that can close those gaps really fast. So what does protein do? Besides, we know it builds muscle, right? Everyone understands that. What are the other functions of protein besides for adolescents that are really important?
So especially with adolescents, I guess, like you said, it's I guess it's development of particularly like the muscle mass and, and our tissues. So once again, supporting that, growth and development. And a lot, it's just a lot, I guess it's a lot to do with, synthesizing new tissues. And then you sort of add exercise on top of that. I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember what you once explained it to me. When we exercise, essentially we're like injuring the muscle, or like, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you sort of think of it like that, then we need, our protein, our energy, but particularly protein, to rebuild and to repair. And we're resynthesizing to strengthen and build that muscle.
Yeah. So what exercise does, it helps to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So the pathway of building new tissue, muscle tissue, right? If we don't have the building blocks there of, protein consumption, how can we improve or increase muscle mass or help with aid recovery when we have a lack of protein? And then the body has general protein requirements, because obviously a lot of people don't understand that the high amounts of protein in the diet can actually positively affect your immune system as well. We have tendon regeneration as well, obviously in the form of collagen, also with ligaments as well. And that's probably the main thing, but is we exercise, we stimulate muscle protein synthesis. We need the adequate amount of protein in order to facilitate that. And then because protein is not stored the same way as fat and carbs, and you can correct me because you're the more qualified one on this one. Carbohydrates, we store it in the blood, in the liver, and in our muscle tissue as glucose or glycogen. Then on top of that is with fat, we either store that within the muscle or within the subcutaneous fat deposits. And that is just through, and we store it because it's readily usable, because carbohydrates are used for high intensity bouts more so. With fats, it's used for more low intensity. So if you're just walking the dog or something like that, you're going to utilize more fats as that fuel source because it takes longer to break down. That's another thing inside. With protein, right, we can't actually store it. So we actually have to utilize energy. It's a very energy intensive process to break down muscle tissue, hence why we need more energy and then also more protein as well, in order to resynthesize the tissue and help to build new tissue on top of that as well. So it's a very intensive process that the body has to go through. Then my understanding, the body doesn't like to gain muscle mass because it's more of a survival mechanism that you have to carry extra weight, which means you're using more fuel. As a result, the body doesn't like to carry the body likes to carry fat as a fuel because it's very, very energy dense specifically. But we know obviously if we gain too much weight, that can have negative effects on our health as well. So it's kind of like a continuum that you've got to kind of sit between, and obviously sports as well, that depending on the sport, some sports do require a bit more muscle mass, more so contact sports. Some sports don't require as much, whether it's like cross-country running. And then you just look at the athletes in general and you see their natural builds and what they're more inclined to be. And even within sports as well, whether it's like a sport like swimming or track and field, the sprinters tend to be greater musculature, whilst the endurance guys and girls, they're on more the less musculature in that case. With that. But I guess in saying that, Steph, so what, obviously the education is one thing as well. The one thing I've also seen is iron. Now, iron's a real big one, especially for young girls, going through puberty. Then you go through the menstrual cycle and whatnot. And we've done a podcast on that. That was actually one of our first ones as well, talking about the menstrual cycle. I guess, how does iron really play a role? Because people talk about like iron levels are low, or I've got to take this supplement and iron infusions. Like, what does it really mean at the end of the day when the iron levels are low, and then how that can actually have an effect on our performance, or even just a normal function?
Yeah, so obviously, athletic populations are quite prone to iron deficiency, and then I guess if we look at that further, lower iron, should say, as well. If we look at that further, female populations as well, like you said, because beginning, menstruation, etc. I guess the role of iron is that it carries, along with hemoglobin, it carries oxygen around the body. So then we look at that in terms of sort of, sporting demands, obviously depending on the intensity of the sport, the training and duration, we need that oxygen to be carried from the lungs to the muscle. And then that is going to what helps to break down our fuel, like our substrate. So like you mentioned, we need access to glucose. That's our primary fuel substrate that we use with exercise, and the same with fats as well. With fat oxidation, we need that oxygen. So I guess in terms of like the sporting context, that's where iron really comes into play.
Yeah. Then in terms of like iron, like if iron is low, like what are some easy strategies, and you're feeling like tired and fatigued, then say for example you're working with a client and they're like 14 years old, that just the menstrual cycles may have just started in the last 6 months. What strategies can you actually put in play if you know that the iron is low? What are some easy things that you can do to actually get them feeling better and performing better, just as a normal person and then as an athlete?
Yeah, so I guess we want to try and restore that. And so essentially, we want to do that through our food sources. So with iron, we're looking at sort of things like our heme sources. So they're like the animal products. And so that iron coming from animal products, we know is more sort of bioavailable, and so it's more easily absorbed. So it's coming from things like your red meats, the salmon, chicken, our green leafy vegetables, our legumes, so our lentils, beans, chickpeas, etc. So I would sort of be focusing on trying to include those in our diet. I just did mention some plant sources actually as well. So then we've got our like non-heme sources, then our plant sources as well. So those that I've just listed, if the athlete's following more of like a plant sort of like vegetarian based diet, etc., depending on what they're following, what their beliefs are, there's some good sources. So I would be trying to incorporate those. We also always want to go with a food first approach before looking at sort of any sort of supplementation, and that should be really guided by, especially in this age bracket, guided by the GP. And so I guess some things to look for in terms of, some signs and symptoms are things like, tiredness, fatigue, maybe they're not feeling motivated when they're coming into training, etc.
Yeah. Then, some of the things we're seeing especially with some of the girls that have experiencing low levels of iron, tired, fatigue, as you mentioned before, but also their heart rate can actually increase in order to compensate for the workload. Now, as you mentioned before, iron's important, to create hemoglobin. Hemoglobin transports oxygen. If you have a lack of hemoglobin, and then you probably have low iron levels, which means you can't transport as much oxygen around in order to break down your fats and carbs in order to utilize for your training sessions. So you will notice that there will be a reduction in power output if the iron levels are actually going to be low as well. And that's a general trend that I've seen with some of the swimmers. And then obviously they've gone to see their GPs. They've either had iron infusion, iron supplementation, but also the recommendation is going to those animal-based sources as their main source of getting iron in to help make that more of a sustainable way, because supplementation is good to help fill in the gaps, but obviously it is designed to fill in those gaps, not as a primary source of nutrition.
Absolutely. Yep.
Cool. And then I guess some of the other things is like, I'm not too sure in terms of this, the issues that I've tend to see as well with a lot of the swimmers is like their meal preparation. Now, I know you being an athlete and obviously working with some other individuals as well, is meal preparation. Like, how much of a role do you reckon meal preparation has this day and age versus like, I guess, when you're a little bit younger as a teenager, now more than ever before?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a bit like a large push now in that direction, in terms of, I guess the way to look at it is that, when you go into like a gym or training with you guys, like obviously you're given like a structured program and like you progress, etc. And I guess now there's more of a push to kind of follow a bit of a similar approach with your nutrition, because you need a plan. You need to have a plan and strategies in place in order to adequately fuel your body, just first of all as a functioning human, and then to support like the sport and demands as well. So yeah, massive push now. I just sort of, I guess, reflecting on when I was younger, for me, that didn't come into play until I guess I took a bit more like responsibility for my like activities. I think that's just sort of a natural thing that happens as you get older. Like, your parents aren't looking after you, or like having less control maybe, or less input into your choices. So I would say from maybe like 15, 16, I sort of started dabbling. That's when I first really started dabbling with like my nutrition and preparation. And, I was really big on prepping the night before, particularly if I was like swimming in the morning or like going to iron training, etc. Like I was really big on like overnight oats. I know they're a bit of a craze. But they're actually a legitimate fuel source. So yeah, preparation is definitely key, especially if you've got like, your early morning sessions. But I think nowadays, as we know, a lot of kids are, participating in multiple sports, or maybe they're participating in multiple training sessions throughout the day, like they're doubling up. So that's where, once again, with that increase in frequency and the increase, I guess, use of our fuel stores, you need to have a plan and you need to prepare in advance.
Cool. This sounds like a lot of food to a lot of parents, right? So
yes.
And how do we go about getting in? Because you might have a swimmer or an athlete, small appetite, can't get a lot of food in. How do we go about working with those types of individuals, of making sure that they get an adequate amount of fuel, but there might be grazers, or there might be slow eaters, or they just want to play basketball at lunchtime with their friends and skip lunch, and then mum's annoyed because the sandwich that she made is still there.
Yes. I remember all that.
This happens all the time. So how do we go about that?
Okay. Yes. No, it's a really good point. I guess we do, obviously, with like anything, when we're looking at this, with youth, we need to remember that there's so many other factors and facets to their life. Like you said, there's this school demands, other sporting demands, social life, all that jazz, etc. So I guess there's sort of two areas that I want to focus on. The first, which I think is it's more, I guess, essentially more of a priority, I would say, is starting with the basics. And when I say, and that's kind of thrown around a lot. And what I really mean by that is that, are they having consistent meals throughout the day? And those meals, what's the quality of them? Are they having a source of protein? There's a source of like, more so like the starchy carbs, so like, potato, rice, pasta, etc. Their veggies, fruit and veggie intake as well. We know in this population it's so low. Like at each meal time, are they having a complete, well-rounded meal? Because we know that is essential, like the essentials for adolescents, but also it's just going to really help with fueling those extra sporting demands as well. So I guess a gold sort of standard that goes around is like, your 3 main meals and then maybe like your 2 to 3 snacks throughout the day. And if your child is not currently following that, what you could do is just start really small. You don't want to go in, it's like with, once again, let's use training as an example. You haven't been training in a while, and then you go smash gym 5 times a week and you're like so sore with DOMs, etc. It's all about like the baby steps. So if they're not having like an afternoon snack, maybe you aim for like, let's say, for example, 4 weeks. Let's try and get, my child to consistently have like an afternoon snack. I think they're sort of some of the basics you really want to be looking at, because once again, it's just going to support them with all their extra demands, even like schooling demands, cognitive function as well, but then also like your sporting demands. And then I guess secondary to that is where we start looking at maybe fueling before training. And so you want a nice digestible source of carbohydrates before your training. And so like you touched on, there are a lot of kids who they might be like nervous before training or like comp days, or they wake up, they don't have much of like an appetite. I know like in the mornings I used to really struggle with getting something in. So it's about being smart with our choices. So basically when it comes to fueling for training and performance, we can actually essentially train our gut to handle more, I guess, volumes of food. So once again, you want to sort of start small. So in the morning, for example, say before swimming, a glass of orange juice or any type of juice is going to be substantial, and it's going to give them about, like, for example, 30 grams of carbs before training, which is what the body needs to fuel them for their session. So starting with, small amounts, and liquids is a really good place as well. And then maybe gradually you experiment or increase that. So maybe you will then half the amount of juice and incorporate and pair that now with like a piece of toast or something like that, to start incorporating more solid foods as the gut sort of starts to handle that more.
Yeah, because your body will just adapt to, I guess, what you expose it to. If you do it long enough, that will be considered its normal point, as well as homeostatic point as well.
Yeah.
And
just quickly, I just want to really make the point as well that like it's really important to start small and start basics. And I think in those sort of areas, if we can nail those, then you can start sort of experimenting a little bit more and I guess try new things.
Keep an eye out on the second installment of our conversation. If you want to stay updated on the latest episodes, make sure to subscribe to Inner Athlete on both YouTube and Spotify.